Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'm finally going to be reviewing the Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy for the Nintendo Switch. I am such a diehard fan of the Ace Attorney series that this is actually the fourth format in which I have purchased these original three games. First, I bought Trials and Tribulations on the original DS, then I played the WiiWare ports of the first two games, including paid the extra $1 for the Rise of the Ashes DLC in the first game. Then I bought the 3DS Trilogy, which is already reviewed. You can check that out for yourself, because most of my opinions have not changed. And now this. You might be thinking, Paul, you have to be absolutely insane to want to re-buy a trilogy of essentially HD Game Boy Advance games. And that's because I love Ace Attorney, and getting a chance to replay them in a more convenient format is always great for me. This is on the Nintendo Switch, so I can play it both on the TV and in handheld mode, and with by far the best graphics that the series has seen yet. The pixels are much smoother, and while the overall animations haven't really changed a bit, the game looks much cleaner, the UI feels a little bit more professional. Typos still haven't been fixed, but the font is really nice looking. And yes, it does look like an HD Game Boy Advance game, but that's also kind of the point. It adds to the charm of the Ace Attorney franchise. So, before I talk about what the game is actually like, because I'm basically re-reviewing this, let's talk about what's different. So, as I already mentioned, the UI is much cleaner and feels much more modern. In addition to that, during those tedious investigations, which, brace yourself, I'm going to complain about them a lot, you'll now have a check mark next to areas of the crime scene or location that you've already investigated so that you don't reread a bunch of dialogue. But the real meat of the changes come in the options menu, which you can see as soon as you start up the game. So, just to name a few, you have 10 save files. That's right, 10. That's a lot. No Ace Attorney game to this day has had 10 save files. Not even the most recent appearances. So this is huge. In addition to that, you can turn down or up the music and sound effects to your liking. So if you don't like the music, you can have the game with just sound effects the whole time if you want to. You can also turn on and off the rumble feature, which is used absolutely magnificently if you're playing with the Joy-Cons. Because in most video games, when you feel rumble when you're playing a game, it's because there's a physical collision. Like, say if you're doing a racing game, you might feel yourself collide with the other car. Or say you're playing a shooting game and you get shot or there's an explosion, you might feel the oomph of that. But since most of this game is in the courtroom and you don't really have a whole lot of physical oomphs, it's mostly the logical and emotional blows that you feel with your own hands. When Phoenix is like, ugh, the prosecutor hit me with a good argument, or take that, that's my evidence. You feel the exhilaration that Phoenix feels. So it's basically helping you to get immersed into this wild, wacky world of a very twisted kangaroo court. This is not meant to be a simulation in the slightest, although it is meant to be a satire of Japanese courts. So if you've ever watched a trial take place in Land of the Rising Sun, this is a lot more accurate than you think, but it's far from what it's like to be in an American court. If you're the type that says, ooh, I like this game so much, I'm going to go out and watch a crime drama, well, it's not going to be nearly as much fun as this. Especially as the games go on, there's more and more humor that makes the courtroom scenes not only enjoyable, but hilarious. The game really sells itself on its absolutely strong writing, with only a handful of typos here and there to break up the otherwise practically perfect script. Getting back to a few more options, there's also the ability to turn off screen shake, which is another way the game tries to immerse you into the experience when, say, it lacks full motion cutscenes and full voice acting, with the exception of the shouts that the characters do. And you can also play the entire game in Japanese. Now, whether there are certain elements of the game that were outright changed in the localized version, that I'm not sure about, because I can't read Japanese, so I probably wouldn't get past the first 2 paragraphs. But the fact that you can play it in the native language that this game was designed in was really cool. And I like how games on the Switch are starting to accommodate for bilingual type of people, or people that say might have bought a Switch from America but are from Japan. This is a nice inclusive option, and I think that would be super cool if they were able to translate that into, say, the Japanese version of the game and let you play in English. Because the English localization here is done extremely well, especially considering that there are a lot of elements that are very clearly Japanese in origin. There's a lot of talk about samurai and sushi and lots of stuff that the American audience would otherwise just not really care about, like, at all. But yet somehow this game makes all this Japanese stuff seem really, really cool. Like, I kind of want to see a samurai movie now, provided it's not anime, which this game is very much an anime. It's also very, very satirical, so you might see a lot of types of humor that might rub you the wrong way if you don't know what to expect. There might be also certain aspects that might rub you the wrong way religiously speaking, and the game has done absolutely nothing to try to alter any of these. However, in my opinion, I would say that most of the time the courtrooms are done magnificently. There are occasionally moments where you have to think as limited as Phoenix does. Like, say you have figured out the case before he has. The game will penalize you if you think too far in advance, so you basically have to pretend that you're inside Phoenix's mind, even if you don't think like he does. In my personal opinion, I would vastly have preferred to play as Edgeworth, because his mind is way more straightforward and logical than Phoenix's, whereas his is more of a, let's see where this goes, and somehow it ends up being right. However, I promised I'd get into those tedious investigations, and oh my gosh. Besides the check marks that I mentioned earlier, the game has done nothing to make them go smoother. Granted, they're not totally awful. Most of the cases, Phoenix has his trusty assistant Maya Fey by his side, who's basically the comic relief of this game. And she has a surprising amount of depth to her as you proceed through the games. Without her, I honestly don't know if I would have continued playing this, because the investigations just bored the heck out of me. Especially because there were often points where the game would have these unintuitive barriers from progression that would make it not exactly clear what it was that I wasn't doing. Did I not show a piece of evidence? Did I not examine a bush? Sometimes it really is that extreme, and I wish the game would have taken more cues from the later Ace Attorney games, seeing as this is a re-release, and say, incorporated a notebook, or incorporated a list of things to do. It also would have been nice if they had fixed the Psyche-Locks. So, generally speaking, when you make a sequel to a game, you try to fix the problems of the original game. But Justice for All and Trials and Tribulations ended up making the experience feel a whole lot worse whenever they tried to fix it. Don't get me wrong, the story is magnificent all the way through, and the writing seems to just get better and better as the game goes along, with the exception of that odd third case in Justice for All. Regardless, what a Psyche-Lock is basically, by the time Phoenix gets to the second case, he earns an object known as the Magatama, which lets him see when someone is holding a secret from him. It is kind of weird that you can't use it in the courtroom, only in the investigations, because that would make his job a whole lot easier. But then again, you wouldn't have as much fun either. And that explains why this ability wasn't present in the first games, because Phoenix didn't have that ability yet. Yes, this game does delve into the supernatural, and yes, sometimes that involves the occult. That may be a huge turnoff to most people, but I highly encourage you to look past it, especially because this game is so satirical in nature that it really shouldn't be taken 100% seriously. That being said, the Psyche-Locks are an interesting concept on paper. They allow you to present evidence and confront people outside of the witness stand. And that's cool on paper, but the execution is really sloppy. You see, you actually lose health, which is considered the judge's patience in the game's original manuals that for some odd reason you can't see in this re-release. And if you present the wrong piece of evidence during an investigation, you're still going to get penalized for it, even though you're not even in the courtroom. And even though you do get half of your life bar refilled, after you successfully break open a Psyche-Lock, the amount of health you still have lost transfers into the courtroom, preceding the investigation. So that really, really drags down. Would have been an incredible experience. In addition to that, oftentimes you can't even break the lock right away. Sometimes you don't have enough evidence to be able to prove where there's a contradiction, and you just have to say, okay, I'm just going to back out. And the game doesn't tell you this until after you fail. In fact, the very first Psyche-Lock you come across, you can't even solve it when you first encounter it. I wish the game did more of a warning system. Like, Phoenix does his internal monologue so much. Maybe he could have said, I'm thinking maybe I don't have enough evidence here. Maybe I should come back. Thankfully, the third game does a little bit better of a job than the second as far as fixing this problem. There are more instances where it either feels obvious or Phoenix will outright say, okay, it's about time to break this person's secrets. Overall, I would highly encourage you to play these games in the order of their original release, which is Ace Attorney, Justice for All, Trials and Tribulations. Even if you have played some of the games and not all of them, playing them in order helps it feel like a cohesive story. Kind of like how you wouldn't read chapter 1 and then chapter 17 of a novel. You'd want to read it in order. Or you wouldn't want to read a book series out of order either, because then you'd miss important aspects of the story. Now, granted, these games generally do have a fine story on their own. They have a habit of taking a bunch of cases that seem unrelated at first, but then they all connect for the finale. But when you take the games as one giant 14 case long story, then it feels like an even bigger connection. And in my opinion, Trials and Tribulations, the third game, has the best overall plot of all of the games. I still think that it becomes twice as amazing if you know what the backstories of the characters are, what went through to transpire to these events. And even though the game does a good job of refreshing newbies, it certainly helped me when I first played it, because I hadn't played the first two games yet. But there's still something about experiencing it for yourself as opposed to just hearing it secondhand. So, that being said, the Ace Attorney games are absolutely magnificent. I don't even need to recommend them twice. Now, some people might be disappointed that literally no effort went into changing the music or the sound effects, with the exception of a new credits theme that you can hear, which is a guitar cover of Maya's theme, in addition to the, quote, new title theme music that's basically an Ace Attorney medley, although it's not really new if you played the 3DS trilogy. It's just a copy and paste of that. Apart from that, this sounds like a Game Boy Advance game. That's not a bad thing, though, as this game has a very well-done soundtrack that knows when to taper off into silence, and it knows how to sound just as dramatic as a not-too-serious, non-courtroom simulation that's in a courtroom should be, which is a pretty hard thing to pull off, in my opinion. It's certainly not on the caliber of, say, Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright with their intense orchestral pieces, but it gets the job done. The sound effects are also done magnificent. Every little psh and psst is used with absolute perfection, and nearly every moment is so thought through and well done. This may be some of the most immaculate writing I have ever seen in a game of this nature, and 5 out of 5 stars on pretty much everything. If the investigations made up the bulk of the game, I would have rated this a heck of a lot lower. But considering that there's more courtroom than actual investigations, I can easily overlook it, because no game is without its faults. In addition, as you proceed through the game, even though Trials and Tribulations doesn't add any new features, the game does new things with the narrative to make sure that you're not getting bored and thinking that the formula is growing stale. For instance, the very first case of Trials and Tribulations is actually a flashback case to where you get to play as Phoenix's mentor and experience a little bit of how he met her and how he first got introduced to law. So, as a result, that's not a new feature per se, as she still has all of the same tricks that Phoenix does, but it's an enhancement to the narrative, and I think that's where Ace Attorney is the strongest. The graphics are the same between all 3 games, but yet they keep coming up with twists and turns to make sure that what you're reading doesn't get boring. That being said, I really hope you'll pick this up for yourself. At the current moment, this is by far the definitive way to play these games. It just feels so satisfying to corner the witnesses and prove what the problem is, and to laugh out loud with all the hilarious references, yet at the same time also be able to take the game's serious moments and be able to shed a tear or two. The game knows how to make you feel other things besides just laughter. And that's really a testament, because the most you usually feel in a regular courtroom is boredom. So with that, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or if I missed anything, please let me know in the comment section. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and good luck watching an actual trial, because it's nowhere near as fun as it is in this game. Bye!